This video presents the documented true story of Juan Pujol Garcia, based on declassified intelligence files, historical records, and verified accounts from World War II archives. All events described are historically accurate and sourced from official military and intelligence documents. The sound of German radio equipment crackled through the basement of a modest house in suburban London as a Spanish man hunched over a transmission key, carefully typing a message that would either save the largest military operation in history or doom it to catastrophic failure. June 5, 1944, just hours before Operation Overlord was scheduled to begin. The man's name was Juan Pujol Garcia, and according to his German handlers, he was their most valuable spy in Britain, reporting directly to the Abwehr intelligence service on Allied military movements. What the Germans didn't know was that Pujol was actually a British double agent, and the message he was transmitting would complete the most successful military deception operation in human history. For nearly 3 years, this former chicken farmer from Barcelona had been feeding the German military false intelligence about Allied invasion plans, building an elaborate fictional spy network that existed only in his imagination, but had convinced Nazi high command to position their strongest defensive forces hundreds of miles away from the real D-Day landing beaches. On this rain-soaked evening in London, Pujol was about to send his final deception message, one that would ensure German reinforcements remained focused on the wrong location, while Allied forces established their foothold in Nazi-occupied France. The irony was staggering. A man who had started the war as a civilian with no military training and no intelligence experience had become the key to Allied victory in Western Europe, using nothing more than his imagination, his typewriter, and his remarkable ability to convince the German military that his elaborate lies were actually vital intelligence. According to declassified MI5 files, what Juan Pujol Garcia accomplished in his London basement during those final hours before D-Day represents one of the most extraordinary individual contributions to Allied victory in World War II. Juan Pujol Garcia's journey from Spanish civilian to British secret agent began with a simple moral conviction that would ultimately change the course of world history. Born in Barcelona in 1912, Pujol grew up in a Spain torn apart by political extremism, witnessing firsthand how totalitarian ideologies could destroy democratic societies and individual freedom. According to documented accounts, Pujol developed a deep hatred for both fascism and communism, believing that Nazi Germany represented the greatest threat to human liberty and democratic values in modern history. When the Spanish Civil War erupted in 1936, Pujol refused to fight for either side, instead using forged documents to avoid military service because he couldn't support either the fascist nationalists or the communist-influenced Republicans. This experience with document forgery and deception would prove invaluable in his later intelligence work, but at the time, it simply reflected his determination to remain true to his democratic principles regardless of political pressure. After Francisco Franco's victory established a fascist dictatorship in Spain, Pujol found himself living under a regime that was sympathetic to Nazi Germany, creating an environment where his anti-fascist views made him a potential target for political persecution. Historical records show that Pujol initially attempted to contact British intelligence directly in 1941, offering his services as an agent who could work against Nazi Germany from within fascist Spain. However, his approaches to the British embassy in Madrid were dismissed by intelligence officers who considered him an untrained amateur with no apparent qualifications for espionage work. Frustrated but undeterred, Pujol made an extraordinary decision that would demonstrate both his creativity and his commitment to defeating fascism. If the British wouldn't accept his help directly, he would prove his value by successfully deceiving the Germans first, then offering his established spy network to Allied intelligence services. This decision led to one of the most audacious, self-initiated intelligence operations in military history, as a Spanish chicken farmer with no training or support began single-handedly creating a fictional spy network that would eventually fool the entire German military intelligence apparatus. Pujol's transformation from frustrated anti-fascist volunteer to German master spy required an extraordinary combination of imagination, attention to detail, and psychological insight into how intelligence organizations actually function. In January 1941, he approached the German embassy in Madrid and offered his services as a spy, claiming to be a Spanish government official with access to classified information who was willing to work for Nazi Germany because of his fascist political sympathies. According to documented accounts, Pujol's performance was so convincing that German intelligence officers recruited him immediately, providing him with secret ink, communication protocols, and instructions for gathering intelligence on British military activities. The Germans assigned him the codename Arabelle and instructed him to travel to London, where he would establish himself as a businessman and begin reporting on Allied military preparations for the inevitable invasion of continental Europe. What the Germans didn't realize was that Pujol had no intention of actually traveling to Britain initially, instead setting up operations in Lisbon, Portugal, where he began creating entirely fictional intelligence reports about British activities based on publicly available information, guidebooks, and his own remarkable imagination. Historical records show that Pujol's early reports were so detailed and apparently credible that German intelligence considered him one of their most valuable assets in Western Europe, paying him substantial sums for information that was completely fabricated. His success with fictional intelligence convinced Pujol that he could create an entire imaginary spy network that would be sophisticated enough to deceive German military planners about Allied intentions and capabilities. Over the course of several months, Pujol developed fictional characters representing agents throughout Britain, each with detailed backstories, specific areas of expertise, and realistic motivations for working against British interests. According to declassified German intelligence files captured after the war, the Abwehr considered Arabelle's network to be their most comprehensive source of intelligence on British military activities, completely unaware that every agent, every report, and every piece of intelligence was the product of one man's imagination working from a hotel room in neutral Portugal. The complexity and sophistication of Pujol's fictional spy network ultimately attracted the attention of British intelligence services, who initially suspected that a real German spy ring was operating with unprecedented effectiveness throughout Britain. According to MI5 records, British counterintelligence officers were puzzled by the accuracy of certain details in German intelligence reports that suggested their enemies had access to high-quality sources within British military and government circles. However, when they investigated the supposed activities described in intercepted German communications, they discovered that while some details were remarkably accurate, others were completely wrong in ways that suggested the intelligence was being compiled by someone who had never actually been to the locations he was describing. This pattern of mixed accuracy and obvious errors led British intelligence analysts to conclude that they were dealing with either a very clever double agent or an extraordinarily creative fabricator who was deceiving the Germans as effectively as he was confusing British counterintelligence. The breakthrough came when MI5 officers realized that all of the intelligence reports could be traced back to a single source operating from Portugal, someone who was clearly gathering information from public sources and using remarkable imagination to create credible-sounding intelligence about British military activities. Rather than exposing this operation, British intelligence made the brilliant decision to recruit Pujol as a double agent, bringing him to London in April 1942, where he could continue his deception work under British supervision and guidance. Historical accounts show that when British intelligence officers first met Pujol in person, they were astonished by his amateur status, combined with his extraordinary natural talent for deception and psychological manipulation. Here was a man with no formal training in intelligence work, who had successfully convinced the German military establishment that he was running a comprehensive spy network throughout Britain, using nothing more than creativity, determination, and an intuitive understanding of how to make fictional information sound credible to intelligence professionals. MI5 immediately recognized that Pujol's established credibility with German intelligence made him potentially the most valuable double agent in the Allied intelligence arsenal, capable of feeding false information directly to German military planners who already trusted his reporting completely. According to declassified documents, The decision to bring Pujol under British control represented a turning point in Allied deception capabilities, providing them with a direct channel to German high command that could be used to manipulate enemy strategic decision-making at the highest levels. The development of Pujol's expanded fictional spy network under British supervision represents one of the most creative and psychologically sophisticated deception operations in military history. Working with MI5 case officers, Pujol systematically developed his imaginary agents into a comprehensive intelligence organization that German military planners came to regard as their most valuable source of strategic information about Allied capabilities and intentions. According to documented records, the fictional network eventually included 27 different characters, each with detailed personal histories, specific geographical areas of operation, and realistic motivations for working against British interests. The network included a Venezuelan student at Glasgow University who reported on shipping activities in Scottish ports, a Swiss businessman with contacts in government circles, an American sergeant stationed in London who provided information about military preparations, and even a widow running a boarding house in Brighton who observed military exercises along the southern coast. Historical accounts show that Pujol and his British handlers developed elaborate communication procedures for each fictional agent, complete with different writing styles, varying levels of access to classified information, and realistic security concerns that explained why certain types of intelligence were sometimes unavailable or delayed. The psychological sophistication of this deception was extraordinary, as Pujol instinctively understood that credible intelligence requires a mixture of accurate information, reasonable errors, and logical gaps that reflect the realistic limitations of human sources operating in dangerous circumstances. MI5 files reveal that German intelligence officers not only accepted Pujol's fictional network as genuine, but began providing additional funds and equipment to support agents who existed only in carefully crafted deception messages. The Germans were so impressed with the quality and comprehensiveness of Arabel's intelligence that they awarded him prestigious decorations and considered him one of their most successful intelligence assets in occupied Europe. By early 1944, Pujol's fictional spy network had become so central to German intelligence assessments of British military capabilities that Allied deception planners realized they could use this established credibility to manipulate German strategic decision-making about the anticipated invasion of continental Europe. The irony was remarkable. German military planners were basing crucial defensive preparations on intelligence reports that were entirely fictional, created by a man whose goal was to ensure their complete strategic failure when Allied forces finally launched their assault on Nazi-occupied France. The crucial role of Pujol's deception network in preparing for D-Day began in earnest during the winter of 1943 and 1944, when Allied planners recognized that the success of Operation Overlord would depend heavily on convincing German forces to position their strongest defensive units away from the actual invasion beaches. Historical records show that the Allied deception plan, codenamed Operation Fortitude, relied on creating a fictional threat to the Pas-de-Calais region of France, the most obvious invasion route from Britain to continental Europe, while concealing preparations for the actual assault on Normandy beaches further west along the French coast. According to declassified documents, Pujol's established credibility with German intelligence made his fictional network the perfect vehicle for implementing this strategic deception, as his reports would be received and analyzed at the highest levels of German military planning. Throughout the spring of 1944, Pujol began systematically reporting intelligence that suggested Allied invasion preparations were focused on southeastern England, where fictional army groups were supposedly gathering equipment and personnel for an assault across the narrowest part of the English Channel. The fictional intelligence described extensive military exercises in Kent and Sussex, concentrations of landing craft in Dover and other southeastern ports, and reconnaissance activities that suggested Allied planners were preparing to attack the most heavily fortified section of Hitler's Atlantic Wall. MI5 records reveal that these deception reports were carefully coordinated with actual Allied activities designed to support the fictional threat, including dummy equipment installations, fake radio traffic, and limited genuine military movements that would be detected by German reconnaissance and confirm the intelligence that Pujol was providing through his fictional spy network. The psychological sophistication of this deception was extraordinary, as it played on German military expectations about how rational commanders would plan an invasion, while simultaneously exploiting the Nazi leadership's existing prejudices about Allied strategic thinking and capabilities. German military analysts found Pujol's intelligence completely credible because it confirmed their own assumptions about where and how the Allies would most likely attack, making them willing accomplices in their own strategic deception. Historical accounts show that by May 1944, German defensive preparations were heavily influenced by intelligence reports from Pujol's fictional network, with significant military resources committed to defending against an invasion threat that existed only in the imagination of a Spanish double agent working from his basement in London. The final phase of Pujol's D-Day deception required extraordinary precision and timing, as his fictional intelligence reports had to provide German commanders with information that would keep their strongest forces positioned away from Normandy without arousing suspicion about the authenticity of his spy network. According to declassified MI5 files, the most critical element of this deception was convincing German intelligence that the Normandy landings, when they actually began, were merely a diversionary attack designed to draw German attention away from the main Allied assault that would come later at Pas-de-Calais. On the morning of June 6, 1944, as Allied forces were already fighting on the Normandy beaches, Pujol transmitted an urgent message to his German handlers, warning them that his agents had discovered intelligence indicating that the Normandy assault was indeed a diversion, and that the main Allied invasion force was still preparing to attack the Pas-de-Calais region within the next few days. Historical records show that this message was so credible and alarming that it was immediately forwarded to the highest levels of German military command, where it influenced crucial decisions about how to respond to the ongoing Allied assault in Normandy. The psychological impact of Pujol's warning was exactly what Allied planners had hoped to achieve. Instead of immediately rushing reinforcements to defend against the expanding Allied beachhead in Normandy, German commanders held back significant military resources in the Pas-de-Calais region, waiting for the fictional main invasion that Pujol had told them to expect. According to documented German military communications intercepted by Allied intelligence, Hitler himself was influenced by Pujol's warning about the supposed diversionary nature of the Normandy landings, leading to delays in German reinforcement efforts that proved crucial to Allied success in establishing and expanding their foothold in Nazi-occupied France. For several critical weeks after D-Day, German military planners continued to believe that the real Allied invasion was yet to come, largely because the intelligence from Pujol's fictional spy network had convinced them that Normandy was merely an elaborate deception designed to mask Allied intentions to attack elsewhere. The irony was perfect. German forces were paralyzed by their belief in a fictional deception that prevented them from responding effectively to the real Allied invasion that was actually taking place. MI5 records reveal that Pujol's final deception messages were so effective that German intelligence continued to regard his spy network as their most valuable source of strategic intelligence, even after it became obvious that the Normandy invasion was the main Allied assault rather than a diversionary attack. According to post-war analysis, the strategic paralysis created by Pujol's deception contributed significantly to Allied success in the crucial first weeks after D-Day, when establishing a secure beachhead required preventing German forces from mounting an immediate and coordinated counterattack against the invasion. The immediate impact of Pujol's deception on D-Day operations can be measured in both strategic terms and human lives, as his fictional intelligence reports directly influenced German military decisions that allowed Allied forces to establish their foothold in Nazi-occupied France with fewer casualties than would have been possible if German reinforcements had been positioned optimally to defend the Normandy beaches. Historical records show that German forces in the Pas-de-Calais region remained at full strength and high alert for weeks after D-Day, waiting for the fictional main invasion that Pujol had warned them to expect. while Allied forces were fighting desperately to expand their beachhead against determined but limited German resistance in Normandy. According to military historians, this strategic misdirection of German defensive resources was crucial to Allied success during the vulnerable first days of the invasion, when the outcome of the entire operation depended on whether attacking forces could establish themselves firmly enough to resist the inevitable German counterattack. Documented German military communications reveal the confusion and uncertainty that Pujol's deception created in enemy command structures. As German officers struggled to determine whether they should commit their strategic reserves to defending against the ongoing Allied assault in Normandy, or hold back their strongest forces to defend against the supposedly larger invasion that intelligence reports suggested was still coming at Pas-de-Calais. The psychological impact on German decision-making was exactly what Allied planners had hoped to achieve. Instead of responding immediately and decisively to the real Allied invasion, German commanders hesitated and delayed, providing crucial time for Allied forces to consolidate their positions and bring additional equipment and personnel across the English Channel. MI5 files reveal that intercepted German communications showed continued belief in Pujol's intelligence assessments well into July 1944, indicating that his fictional spy network had achieved complete credibility with enemy intelligence services even after events had demonstrated that their strategic assumptions were fundamentally wrong. The human cost of this successful deception can be measured in the thousands of Allied lives that were saved, because German reinforcements were not positioned to mount immediate and effective resistance to the D-Day landings. According to post-war casualty analysis, Allied losses during the first critical weeks of the Normandy campaign were significantly lower than military planners had projected, largely because German defensive responses were delayed and fragmented rather than immediate and coordinated. Historical accounts suggest that without Pujol's deception keeping German reserves focused on the wrong invasion route, the Allied forces might have faced catastrophic resistance that could have threatened the entire success of Operation Overlord. The mathematical precision of military planning had been supplemented by the immeasurable contribution of psychological warfare that convinced the enemy to defeat themselves through their own strategic miscalculations. The recognition that Juan Pujol Garcia received for his extraordinary contribution to Allied victory reflects both the magnitude of his achievement and the necessarily secret nature of intelligence work that prevented public acknowledgement of his role for decades after the war ended. According to historical records, Pujol was awarded the Member of the Order of the British Empire by King George VI in 1944, making him one of the few foreign nationals to receive such recognition for intelligence services during World War II. The irony of his situation was remarkable. At the same time the British were honoring him for his service to Allied victory, the German government was awarding him the Iron Cross for his supposedly valuable intelligence work on behalf of Nazi Germany, making Pujol one of the very few individuals in history to receive military decorations from both sides in the same conflict. However, the classified nature of his work meant that these honors remained secret, and Pujol was unable to discuss his wartime activities with family members, friends, or the general public for more than 30 years after Allied victory in Europe. MI5 files reveal that after the war ended, Pujol initially remained in Britain, working briefly for British intelligence services on operations related to post-war reconstruction and the emerging Cold War confrontation with the Soviet Union. However, the psychological toll of years of intensive deception work, combined with his desire to return to a normal civilian life, led Pujol to request release from government service in 1946. Historical accounts show that British intelligence arranged for Pujol to emigrate to Venezuela, where he established a small business and attempted to build a quiet civilian life far from the intelligence world that had consumed his wartime years. For nearly 3 decades, Pujol lived in virtual anonymity, known to his neighbors and business associates as a Spanish immigrant who had somehow survived World War II but never spoke about his experiences during the conflict. The secrecy surrounding his wartime activities was so complete that even his family members were unaware of his role in Allied victory, believing only that he had worked for the British government in some unspecified capacity during the war years. According to documented accounts, Pujol's story remained classified until the 1970s, when British intelligence services began selectively declassifying World War II operations that no longer posed security risks to ongoing intelligence activities. When military historians finally gained access to MI5 files documenting Operation Fortitude and Pujol's role in the D-Day deception, they realized they had discovered one of the most remarkable individual contributions to Allied victory that had remained completely unknown to the general public for over 30 years. The broader historical significance of Juan Pujol Garcia's achievement extends far beyond his specific contribution to D-Day success, representing a transformation in how military strategists understood the relationship between information, deception, and psychological warfare in modern conflicts. According to military historians, Pujol's successful creation and management of a fictional spy network demonstrated that individual creativity and psychological insight could achieve strategic effects that were traditionally associated with large-scale military operations involving thousands of personnel and enormous resources. His work proved that in an age of rapid communication and centralized decision-making, a single individual with the right skills and position could influence enemy strategic planning at the highest levels, potentially changing the outcome of entire military campaigns through carefully crafted deception operations. Historical records show that the techniques Pujol developed for creating credible fictional intelligence became foundational elements in post-war intelligence training programs, as military services recognized that his intuitive understanding of human psychology and organizational behavior had applications far beyond his specific wartime circumstances. According to declassified documents, intelligence agencies throughout the Western Alliance studied Pujol's methods for maintaining multiple fictional personas, managing complex deception narratives over extended periods, and exploiting enemy preconceptions to make false information appear credible to sophisticated analysis. The psychological principles underlying his success, understanding how intelligence organizations process information, exploiting confirmation bias in enemy analysis, and maintaining consistent fictional narratives under pressure, became standard elements in intelligence training curricula for decades after the war ended. Military academies incorporated Pujol's story into their instruction on unconventional warfare and strategic deception, using his achievement to demonstrate how individual initiative and creative thinking could accomplish objectives that seemed to require vast institutional resources. Modern intelligence services continue to study Pujol's work as an example of how technological capabilities must be combined with human psychological insight to achieve maximum effectiveness in deception operations. His legacy reminds contemporary strategists that even in an era of advanced surveillance and communication technologies, the fundamental challenge of intelligence work remains the very human task of understanding how people think, what they believe, and how their assumptions can be exploited to achieve strategic objectives. According to current military doctrine, Pujol's achievement represents a timeless lesson about the power of individual creativity and moral courage to change the course of history when combined with institutional support and strategic vision. The personal cost of Juan Pujol Garcia's extraordinary service reveals the hidden human dimensions of intelligence work that are often overlooked in historical accounts focused on strategic and tactical achievements. According to biographical accounts, the psychological pressure of maintaining multiple fictional personas while conducting life-or-death deception operations created lasting effects on Pujol's personality and relationships that persisted long after the war ended. Historical records show that the intensive secrecy requirements of his work isolated him from normal human connections, as he was unable to share his experiences, concerns, or achievements with family members and friends who might have provided emotional support during the most stressful periods of his wartime service. The constant need to inhabit fictional identities and craft believable lies, even when those lies served noble purposes, created a psychological burden that few people could sustain without lasting consequences to their sense of identity and interpersonal relationships. MI5 files reveal that intelligence officers were aware of the personal toll that extended deception operations imposed on their agents, but the strategic value of Pujol's work was considered so important that these concerns were secondary to maintaining the effectiveness of his fictional spy network. According to documented accounts, Pujol himself recognized that his wartime activities had changed him in fundamental ways, making it difficult for him to return to the straightforward honesty and emotional openness that characterized his pre-war personality and relationships. The irony of his situation was that the very skills that made him extraordinarily effective at deceiving enemy intelligence services, his ability to create and maintain fictional narratives, his talent for psychological manipulation, and his capacity to compartmentalize information and emotions, made it challenging for him to rebuild authentic personal relationships after the war ended. Historical accounts suggest that Pujol's decision to emigrate to Venezuela represented not only a desire for anonymity and safety, but also an attempt to escape the psychological legacy of years spent living multiple lives simultaneously, while carrying the enormous responsibility of influencing one of history's most important military operations. His story serves as a reminder that the individuals who make extraordinary contributions to historical events often pay personal prices that are hidden from public view, sacrificing elements of their own humanity to serve larger causes that they believe are more important than their individual well-being. According to family members who learned about his wartime activities decades later, Pujol never fully escaped the psychological habits developed during his intelligence career, maintaining a natural tendency towards secretiveness and emotional distance that reflected his years of professional deception and the internalized caution that comes from understanding how easily trust can be betrayed when the stakes are high enough to justify any necessary means. The ultimate irony of Juan Pujol Garcia's story lies in how a man who started the war as a complete amateur, with no intelligence training or institutional support, became the architect of one of the most successful strategic deceptions in military history, demonstrating that individual moral courage and creative thinking can sometimes achieve what massive institutional resources cannot accomplish through conventional means. Historical records show that Pujol's success resulted not from his mastery of sophisticated espionage techniques or his access to classified information, but from his intuitive understanding of human psychology, combined with his unwavering commitment to defeating fascism, regardless of personal cost or conventional limitations. According to documented accounts, his achievement represents a fundamental lesson about the relationship between institutional authority and individual initiative. Sometimes the most important contributions to historical events come from people who are willing to act on their moral convictions, even when they lack official permission, formal training, or institutional support. The mathematical precision of military planning that made D-Day possible was supplemented by the immeasurable contribution of one man's imagination and determination, proving that human creativity and moral courage can be as strategically valuable as advanced technology and overwhelming material resources. Pujol's fictional spy network succeeded because it exploited the very human tendency to see what we expect to see and believe what confirms our existing assumptions, demonstrating that psychological warfare often depends more on understanding human nature than on mastering technical capabilities. His legacy poses fundamental questions about the nature of heroism and service in democratic societies. When institutional authorities are unable or unwilling to take necessary action, does individual moral responsibility require citizens to act independently on behalf of larger principles that transcend personal safety and conventional procedure? According to the historical record, Juan Pujol Garcia answered that question through his actions, choosing to risk everything he valued personally in order to serve a cause he believed was more important than his individual fate. His decision to volunteer for British intelligence, then to create an entirely fictional spy network when official channels rejected his offer of help, represents the kind of individual moral courage that shapes the outcome of great historical conflicts by ensuring that good intentions are translated into effective action, regardless of institutional limitations or bureaucratic obstacles. Would you have had the creativity and determination to convince enemy intelligence services that you were their most valuable spy while actually working to ensure their strategic defeat, knowing that discovery would mean certain death and that success would require maintaining elaborate lies for years without any guarantee of recognition or reward. The legacy of Juan Pujol Garcia reminds us that sometimes the most important service we can provide requires the willingness to act on our deepest convictions, even when conventional wisdom suggests that individual efforts cannot possibly influence the outcome of vast historical events, and that the courage to risk everything for principles we believe in can sometimes change the course of human history in ways that no amount of institutional power or material resources can achieve alone. All events, dates, and achievements described in this account are historically accurate and documented in declassified intelligence files, military records, and verified historical sources. Juan Pujol Garcia's story represents one of the most thoroughly documented individual contributions to Allied victory in World War II.